There in Africa, uh, the people have started lining up now to be tested to see if they can enter this first ever trial in Africa for the use of low-dose naltrexone for HIV. Just to introduce a little bit about Dr. McCandles, she is the person who broke through the envelope with autism spectrum disorders and introduced the use of low-dose naltrexone, and worked with the pharmacist who was mentioned earlier to offer topical low-dose naltrexone to these children. You can, if you haven't already, you can visualize here is a child who isn't too easy, who isn't going to be sitting still to swallow anything. And now when the child is going to bed, perhaps already asleep, the parent just rubs on the pre-measured dose, and they've got their dose of low-dose naltrexone at the right time. Already Dr. McCandles says that she's aware of over 7,000 autism spectrum disorder children on low-dose naltrexone, and she's saying that the reports from parents are positive already to the 75% point. I mean, quite miraculous. The kinds of improvements they report are there on the top line. Thinking and mood and language and sociability. Because of her interest in autism, coming to these conferences, she became aware that LDN has lots of other uses. And so everything fell into place for her. She happened to run a study on markers of the immune system in these children. And if you look in the third line on the slide, you'll see it says 18 of 20 children, or 90%, raised CD4 counts, CD4 plus counts, after 16 weeks of LDN. That's critical finding. That already tells you that the new trial that's just signing up people in Africa is going to be very successful. Because if you can keep the CD4 counts up every day with low-dose naltrexone, and you've got an HIV infection, you're not going to get AIDS, because your status is not going to deteriorate. Your immune system is not going to get beat up, and that's exactly what Bernie Bahari found in his practice. In Africa, 25 million people infected with HIV virus, over 2 million people dying every year from AIDS there, and an estimated 2.8 million newly infected every year. The fact that most new infections are women was a very important fact for Dr. McCandles and her husband. And you'll see as we go through the slides that one of the things they're doing, they're not just testing LDN and treatment of HIV, but a lot of effort is going to go into counseling, which is really part 2 of this trial. It was Jacqueline and Jack who decided to get the trial going by standing up and saying, all right, bureaucracy in Mali, if you're worried about money going from this area to that area and this area to that area, we will make up for any monies you don't have. And that's what got the trial going. They're real heroes. The team over there in Bamako University in Mali has worked already with universities over here. They have run clinical trials in the past, and a year or so ago, Jackie went over there, looked at the labs, and was quite impressed. The protocol that was originally planned, Bernie and I worked over it some years ago, and we waited for years to see some action over there, but didn't until McCandles got involved. The original protocol was very typical of the U.S. trial. Here's this group, they'll get low-dose naltrexone. Here's this group, they'll get a placebo. No. Not in Africa that's going to happen. And rightly so. And so the team over there changed the parameters so that everybody gets something. And you'll see later what they designed it so that it would be acceptable to Africa, where Africa knows that the West, if any of you have seen or read The Constant Gardener and other such materials, the West is highly suspect when they come over there with drugs. But the purpose of the trial is to evaluate the efficacy in preventing progression of HIV to full-blown AIDS by using LDN. So here's the protocol for the medical portion. There'll be 250 participants, and it's broken into 3 groups. It's approximately a year's study. One group, if you look to the bottom, they'll receive highly active antiretroviral drugs, period. The second group, also 90 participants, receive highly active antiretroviral drugs and low-dose naltrexone. And the third group receives low-dose naltrexone only. And you see the parameters for letting people in have to be a non-pregnant adult. I think I hit on, I was helpful at least getting them to agree on the CD4 range so that if you're not in that range, you're not a candidate for the trial. To pick 275 to 475 CD4 cell count range means because a normal amount of CD4 cells might be, say, 1,000 or more. That means that your infection has already led to a degradation of your immune system if you're down to 275 to 475. And yet, it's not low enough that it would give you AIDS at that point. So you're at a point where you could be saved. And one could demonstrate an effectiveness. The U.S. medical journals have already demonstrated that if you take somebody whose immune system has already eroded to some degree, like this, in that range, and you don't treat them, you can definitely count on coming back 1 year later and finding that their CD4 cells are on the average 80 less than what they began with, always. So as far as I'm concerned, what this trial is going to be about is that third group on LDN only, who a year from now, keep your fingers crossed, will come back with the same average CD4 cells that they began with. That, for me, is the whole trial. That's what I think we're going to see, I hope. Here's the second part that Jack Zimmerman is so involved with. They've been training counselors over there to counsel, talking about getting groups together, talking about relationships, men and women, infectivity. Jack's foundation does that here in the States and probably is doing it over the Middle East and other areas as well. So going back to the trial, they're going to, as you see the title, they're going to test every 12 weeks, and at the end of the 9-month study, at the outset, they're going to rule out pregnancy, malaria, and TB. Those are the tests they hope to do at regular intervals, the complete blood count, the chemistry panels, checking for kidney and liver problems. Those are the parameters for the CD4 cell count on starting, going into the trial. They also intend to measure interferon alpha, which is something that Bernie by Harry discovered some 20 years ago when he did his first trial that never really did get published on AIDS or HIV infected people and LDN. He found that they run very, very high interferon alphas, and when he looked at the group that responded beautifully well to the LDN by not getting worse, these were the ones whose interferon alphas dropped back toward the normal. Those whose interferon alphas stayed high did poorly. They're going to measure viral count out of interest, although I think the CD4 plus cell count is much more the gold standard. So please keep your fingers crossed with me, because a year from now we may hear some wonderful news, and which may help millions and millions of people deal with their infection for HIV.